Yeah, any questions?
Actually, I have installed all the three softwares: JIT, Oracle,
Mm-hmm.
VM.
Okay.
And do I need to enable, like, while enabling the virtualization, I'm not getting the screen like option like virtualization enable. So how do I get
Uh,
that?
See, basically, I mean, it depends on laptop. So maybe you just have to Google how to enter the BIOS menu. This
Okay.
is one. Just reboot the machine. So it will be either press escape continuously,
Okay.
or in some of the laptops it might be F11
I tried
or
escape.
F1, 12.
Okay. Hmm.
So just Google for your laptop, for your make, like how
Hmm.
to enter into BIOS menu for
BIOS.
Intel, this thing, or HP or whatever like that.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Hmm.
And then once you enter into BIOS menu, there will be options. You just have to, go to that particular option. Just use your arrow keys, and there will be
Yeah.
something called VTX or virtualization enabled. That you have to, uh, it will be disabled by default. That you have to enable and save and exit.
Okay.
Okay. Try
Okay.
this. If it doesn't work, you tell me your laptop this thing. I'll check.
Okay.
You can check in Google. They will be giving with screenshots.
Yeah, I have the screenshot. So now I will.
Okay. Anyone else?
Thanks.
Okay. So we'll see some of the advanced commands today, so which we regularly use. Okay, so basically, right? So if you want to get IP address of a machine, what we do is we just type if config-a. It lists the IP addresses, right? So a machine can have multiple IP address. One can be private, the other can be public, right? So this is the IP 10.0.0.125. This is public IP. This is private IP. We'll see how to do that, how to assign a public IP, how to assign a private IP when we are seeing Vagrant. But this is the command which will list all the interfaces or adapters. This is one adapter, this is one adapter, right? And it has one IP address associated with. So every machine will have a loopback IP, that is the local host IP. Even your Windows machine will have a IP called 127.0.0.1. This is the local host IP. Okay, so using this IP, anybody can connect to this machine. And if you want to find out the host name, the command is just host name. This will give the host name of the machine. So in general, the host name will be something like this, right? So let us say if you just type host name on a machine, it will be like server1.in.ibm.com, right? Or server1.us.ibm.com. Yes, we can launch multiple machines, or we can launch with single Vagrant file as well. We'll see that in detail. This one, this is called here, server one is called short name, right? Server1.in.ibm.com is called fully qualified domain name. Right? So what is this? This is the full name of the machine, right? So we can connect to a machine using this name, this full name, fully qualified domain name, FQDN. So when we are assigning a IP or when we are trying to connect to a machine, we have to use the full name, right? So with this full name, the machine will be reachable. Okay, so if config-a is a command to find out the IP address, hostname is to find out the machine name, and let us say there are two machines, server 1 and server 2. Because of some reason you are not able to connect to server 2. Now I want to start debugging, like whether server 2 is up and running or is there any problem, why I am not able to reach the server 1. I just said from server 1 ssh-l root to server 2. So it says connection refused or timed out, this kind of errors it is giving. So how do I debug? The first thing to do is ping server 2 dot, let us say in.ibm.com, or the IP address, something like ping 10.0.1.2. So this will actually to check whether the remote machine is alive or not. Alive in the sense it is up and running or not, whether the network connectivity on the other machine is up or not, right? So basically what you do is you just send packets to that machine and check the acknowledgement, whether all these packets are received properly or not. So that is ping, just to check whether the remote machine is alive or not. So let us take two machines. Okay, let us see that later. Then every application which is listening, which is running on a particular machine, will listen on a port, right? So that ports we can find out using netstat-na command to list out the ports on which applications are listening. Right, so every application will listen on a port. Let's say if you install Jenkins, by default it will be on port 8080. Okay, so if you install Nexus, by default it will be running on 8081. We can change the port. So basically port is like a logical connection. So when we send out requests to that particular server, those requests will be meeting the server on this particular port, right? So there's a number, so there will be one application running on each port. So if you just want to find out whether application is running or not, we can just say netstat-na. Okay, something like this, netstat-na. If you just give, it will give the information about the ports. These are the ports. Okay. So to check whether application is running or not, we give this netstat-na command. So I have two machines. Let me log into one of the machines. So what is the IP address of this machine? This is the IP address. So I'm trying to ping this from other machine. So this is first machine, this second machine. So I want to see whether the other machine is alive or not. If you just type ping, it will ping the other machine, and when you say Control C, it will come out of the prompt. So you can see 9 packets transmitted, 9 packets received, 0% packet loss. This indicates that we have sent some packets, we have received the acknowledgement, and there is no data loss. So if the other machine is not pinging, you will get 100% packet loss. This is the proper IP. So let us try for something which is not existing. So it will not ping, and if I, after some time, if I say Control C, it says host unreachable, 100% packet loss, indicating that the remote machine is down, right? So using this, we can check whether a particular machine is alive or not, whether it is responding or not, right? Ping 10 dot. So this is the ping command. Or let us say in some of the distinct scripts, maybe we want to automate that, whether a machine is pinging or not. So to do that, there is another command with option ping-c2 10.0.0.137. This will ping 2 times and the prompt will exit automatically. And you can see this pinged 2 times and there is 0% packet loss. Okay, just ping will ping indefinitely and it will go on till you come out of the prompt, right? And if you want to ping for 2 iterations, ping -c2 is the command. Ping -cn for the n number of iterations. Okay, and so let's start with the command to find out the port on which a particular application is listening. And what else we have? We have a trace route. Some IP address, and then let me see. What is IP? Seems like it's not installed on this machine. Let me see. Okay, let this install. So this traceroute command is basically to find out, let us say there is server 1 and server 2, and when we send a packet from server 1 to server 2, it goes through a lot of other devices, right? So maybe server 1 is connected to switch, network switch, right? So from there it goes to, let us say, a router, and from there it goes to another network switch 2, and then from there maybe it's connected to another router, or from there it may be connected to another switch, right? So like this it goes through several network devices, and let us say something is not pinging and this machine is not pinging from server 1, and I want to find out the exact packet flow, how the transfer is happening. Like from server 1, if I say ping server 2, it goes to network switch 1, router switch 2, and all these things, right? So there might be some problem at some level. Maybe network switch 1 is not responding, router has a problem, switch 2 has a problem, right? So just to find out that, I want to trace the route. So trace route and the IP is the command. In a network infrastructure, if you just type the IP, so what happens is it will show all the IP addresses in which the packet is traversing from here to here. So we can see all the devices which are involved in this packet flow. Okay, so basically in a typical data center you have a lot of servers and you have a lot of network switches, a lot of network devices, routers and all that. So when we type trace route, it exactly shows in which direction the packet flows. So let us say it is struck here after network switch 1. That indicates that there is some problem in the network switch 1. Maybe the switch is struck or there is some software problem. So based on that we can debug where is the network issue. Okay. So this will be useful to find out if there is any network issue. I don't know if this will work in local environment. Let us see. Okay, this is the self. I'm pinging the self machine. That's why it's giving this. Let me try this. So we basically trace route the second machine from the first machine. Okay, so since this is the local environment, there are two VMs set up on my laptop itself. It is not giving anything, but in a typical data center environment, if you just say traceroute and IP, it will give a lot of devices, which are something like switches, routers, and all. Okay, so maybe because this is created on my local environment, it is not giving too many devices. In a lab, in a typical lab, it goes through various devices. So all those devices will be listed, and if it is struck somewhere at some point of time, that indicates that that device has a problem. Okay. And there is a command called top. This is to find out the CPU utilization. To find out the CPU utilization on a machine, just type top. It will give the CPU utilization in percentage. You can see this 0.3%, and this is the memory percentage. So CPU consumed by each process and memory consumed by each process. So why do we need to take care of this? Because we have to check if any process is consuming more than 80% of the CPU or 90% of the CPU. So if any process is consuming more CPU, machine will become slow, and there might be some software issue in that process, in that application, which is causing this. Maybe some infinite loop, or maybe some memory leak that we need to find out. I mean, that we need to open a ticket or bug to the developer to check. So ideally, the CPU utilization should not be more than 80% or 70%. If it is continuously increasing, means there might be some memory leak issue that is causing the problem. So if the CPU utilization increases, or it reaches 80 or 90%, the machine may crash. Same is with the memory percentage. So that's why we need to continuously check what is the CPU utilization, right? So for that, we have a command called top. Okay. And to come out, press Q to quit. Just enter top. It will show the CPU utilization, and to come out, you need to just enter Q to come out of the prompt. Okay, is this clear? SSH conf, can you see this? SSHD_conf, this is the file, right? Check first SSH is installed or not using the commands. If it is Ubuntu, dpkg-l grep for SSH, and if SSH is installed, this file will be present. Or check in if some of the distributions, it will be something like etc ssh sshd_conf. Okay, so these are some of the commands. So how do we find out, how do we install a package on Ubuntu? What is the extension of a package? Which package we need to download? Let us say I want to download Chef. What is the extension of package on Ubuntu? How does it look like? Chef version .x86 hardware architecture .deb. This is the extension of package in case of Ubuntu. .rpm for Linux, RHEL, right? So if you want to install a single package, dpkg-f chef.deb or dpkg rpm-ivh, chef.rpm is the commands which we use, right? So let us say that there is something called dependencies in Linux, right? So let us say chef.rpm is dependent on a package called Ruby, right? So first Ruby has to be installed to install Chef. So Ruby is a dependency for Chef. So without installing Ruby, we cannot install Chef. In the same way, let us say I want to install a package called ABC. ABC is dependent on DEF, DEF is dependent on XYZ, XYZ is dependent on something else, right? So to install that, I need to install first GH, then XYZ, then DEF. So what is the process I need to follow? First I need to do RPM-IVH, right? First step is install gh.rpm, then RPM-IVH XYZ.rpm, then RPM-IVH DEF.rpm, then RPM-IVH ABC.rpm. So this is the process I have to install. One by one I need to install, right? So let us say in one scenario ABC is dependent on a package called 1 and ABC is dependent on a package called 2 and ABC is dependent on a package called 3, right? Then this package 1 is dependent on another package called A, B, C, right? Package 2 is again dependent on DEF. XYZ. So first I need to install C, B, A, then 1, F, D, F, E, D, then 2, Y, Z, X. Like that there are, again A is dependent on several packages, B, C, like this. So I have to do this manually one by one. Let us say there are 100 packages to be installed. So it's tedious job for a system administrator to install all these things by hand, right? So for that we have some commands, some tools which does automatically, right? So tools to install the packages, take care of the dependencies, right? I'll come to that. So basically we need to install the packages and their dependencies as well, right? So to check that, to do that, we have several commands. So for CentOS, Red Hat, Fedora, we have a utility called yum, and for Ubuntu we have a utility called apt-get, right? So this comes by default with the system, so we just need to configure the repository. So these are the repository tools to install the packages and their dependencies. If you want to install a single package, again the commands are this. But if you want to install a bunch of packages, if you want to take care of the dependencies automatically, we need to use commands like yum or apt-get. Okay, so what is the syntax? Yum install, let us say chef, or apt-get install chef, right? So this will install, let us say yum install ABC. If you say, even if ABC is dependent on 100 packages, 100 packages will be installed in the order automatically, then ABC will be installed. In the same way, apt-get install chef. If I say, so 100 packages will be installed first, then chef will be installed on Ubuntu. So for Ubuntu it is apt-get, for CentOS, Red Hat, Fedora it is yum, right? So from where it actually picks up the packages, right? So from where it downloads the packages. So there has to be some site, or there has to be some repository, some centralized server from there, from where our machine connects and downloads the packages and installs on the local machine, right? So I have server 1 Vagrant installed machine, and when I say yum install, let us say something like chef, it actually connects to a machine, a centralized server where all the chef packages are stored, and from there it downloads first, then installs on the machine, right? So where is the information about you go and download from this site is mentioned for server 1. So that is called repository configuration. So what is the repository configuration for RHEL, CentOS, Fedora? So the file is, the directory is etc yum.repos.t. Okay, and for Ubuntu the file is etc apt sources list, right? So in this directory we tell like these are the websites, you have to look for this package. When I say yum install xyz, it will go for look for that package on the websites which are given in this file, and then it will pick that website from there and it will install. If I go here, this is Ubuntu machine, and if you just say etc apt sources list, so there will be a file, and if you just open it, so here these are the packages, these are the sites from where it downloads, right? So http archive-ubuntu.com ubuntu Xenial. Xenial is the distribution name 16.04, and it's something like we are telling the machine go and download from this site, right? So there are a lot of packages available in this centralized repository which is maintained by Ubuntu, and when we say apt-get install some package, it goes there and downloads and installs. Okay, so something like apt-get install, let us say OpenSSH, there is no package. Let us say SSH. So if there is only one package, it will directly install. See, SSH package is installed. This particular package will be installed. If there are multiple packages, it will ask you confirmation you want to install or not. Let us say apt-get install Ansible. See, I just say to install Ansible, but it is also trying to install all these packages. Why? Because Ansible is dependent on all these packages, Python, SSH, parse, etc., etc. Right? And it is asking to you want to continue or not. You can just say yes or no. That will install all these packages first, then it will install Ansible. Right? From where it is picking up Ansible, it is actually going to the sites where in etc apt sources list the sites are mentioned, and it will go to that particular site and it will try to install Ansible, right? So this is how we can use apt-get install, and if I say yes, it will install all the packages one by one, right? So apt-get install Ansible, when I say, it goes to etc apt sources list, it looks for the website where Ansible repositories are stored, and it will check for the dependencies automatically, and then it will install the dependencies one by one, right? So apt-get install Ansible will ask for a confirmation you want to install Ansible or not, all these packages or not. If I want to automate that, Ansible install -y, apt-get install -y Ansible, this will without interaction, without confirmation, it will directly ask to install. It will basically install. Okay, what is the question? Yes, so you need to have internet connection to download the packages from internet, from the repository. If you don't have the internet connection, also we can configure the repository using the ISO. So that is like ISO is a installation media for Linux machines. So this is like a bundle of all the packages. So this we can download, and we can use that to install the packages, install the repository, and install the packages. Right? Something like you are under a corporate firewall security, and you cannot access the internet from the machine. So you still want to use apt-get or yum. So in that case, we can configure the repository locally and install all the packages using ISO. Or if you have the internet connection, then by default there will be some repositories configured, and using those repositories we can install using apt-get or yum install, right? So this is CentOS. So here I can say yum install and then some package name. So that will install. Let us say NetTools is a package that will have the binaries like ifconfig and all. If you want to use ifconfig, we should have NetTools. And if I say yum install NetTools, it's already installed, it says. This package is already installed and it has the latest version. So let me remove yum remove NetTools. See, when I say remove net tools, it says removing for the dependencies. So this Puppet and Factor are the two components which are dependent on net tools. So you want to remove, it's asking for a confirmation. If you say yes, it will remove all those packages. I'll not remove. Okay. Or you want to install something else. SSH. So I just asked to install SSH. It is trying to install some other packages as well. SSH shuttle. So whatever is starting with SSH, it will try to install. Okay, because I have given something called star. This we'll see what is star, how it matches all these characters. But for now, so yum install is a command that will install the package which we give. It will basically go and check in the, so for Ubuntu it says etc, we say etc app sources list. This is the file where it goes and looks. For CentOS or RHEL, the command is etc yum.repos.t, and these are the repositories for which we have the we have mentioned something like from where you have to go and download. So this is jenkins.repo. So here the information about the Jenkins site will be mentioned. Like if when you say yum install Jenkins, it goes to this particular repository and it tries to download from this site. You can open and see. Okay, so this is the site package.jenkins.io/redhat. From here it tries to download the packages. Okay, just say yum install Jenkins. Okay, so it says Jenkins is already installed, but it's trying to update to the latest version. If I just say yes, this particular package will be installed. For the first time, if you install Jenkins is dependent on Java. So it will try to install Java first, then it will try to install Jenkins. So dependencies it will install first, then it will install the other packages. Okay, is this clear? Okay, apt-get is a package to install on Ubuntu. Yum install is a package. Yum is the package to install on the, yum is the command to install on the Red Hat. So from now, most of the times we use these commands to install something. Okay. So now Ansible is installed. If I just type Ansible, it will give the options. Or let us say, I just say Ansible -- version. So this will give the version of the package which is installed on the machine. So Ansible is installed via apt-get. Apt-get install Ansible. We can remove also using apt-get remove. If you just say yes, that will be removed. Now if I say Ansible, no such file or directory, right? So any application or any tool, if you want to install, you can just install using apt-get or yum. So if you want to download from the internet, you should have the internet connection. And if you don't want to use internet, you can still configure locally using the ISO. Okay. So some of these things we'll see today, the shell properties, right? So we just type some command lsfnlrt that will list 9 columns. lsfnlrt / will list all the columns from the / directory, right? So lsfnlrt, and I have typed a very big command. Right, like this, and I want to go to the beginning, right, to ls, and I want to modify the command. So either there are two options. Either you can use the cursor to move here and here, or there is something called Control A which goes to the beginning, the cursor Control A which goes to the end. Okay, so if you have a very big command and if you want to go to the beginning or end, you can just say Control A or Control E. So these are the some of the options which shell provides. Bash shell. Bash shell has some advanced features using which we can go to the beginning or go to the end. Let us say lsfnlrt, and I want to remove this. Control W is to remove. Remove a word. Control U to clear the line. So you just typed something. Don't want to type that, and you want to type something else. Control U will simply remove that complete line. Okay, and there is something like when you just type Google and you just say how to, it will give a lot of suggestions, right? So something like it will fill for you, autofill, right? In the same way, if you just want to type something here and just press tab, it will give the options what all start with VA. If you see, it's giving two options, var and vagrant. So there are two directories, var and vagrant with VA, and then if you just press tab, it will give the options. And if you just say G and enter, if there is only one directory, it will automatically fill it, right? You don't have to type the complete thing, it will only fill for us. Tab is to autofill, right? If there is only one directory, it will fill automatically. And if you just say vagrant, VA and tab, it will give the possible options which you may want to type, right? So there are two directories, var and vagrant. So which one you want to select, something like that. And if I say var, it will fill, right? LO, there are three directories with LO, log, lock, local, right? So if it is a very big directories there and you don't want to type that, you can use tab, it will fill automatically. Okay, if it is a unique directory, right? So we type a lot of commands, right? If you just see history, we'll see all the commands which we typed, right? So these are the commands which we executed from beginning, right? And one command I'm executing repeatedly, and I don't want to enter that command again. With just search, I can again, with some unique word search, I can get the command. Let us say Control R L. If I just type L, it is showing clear, right? Or if I just type Control R LS, it is showing lsfnlrt. So this is for the reverse search. It will basically search in the reverse order whatever the commands we have executed, and it will show the possible options. So we don't have to type the command. So there might be some very big commands, something like this: Ansible playbook -verbose -f, some host file, right? And then there is a playbook name. So this command, we don't want to type it again and again, right? So if I just press one option, this entire command should come. So that is done using Control R. That's called reverse search, right? So let us say you executed this command. Ansible is not installed. I just, for example, just for demonstration purpose, I'm executing this. And now you want to execute the same command again. Now if I just say AN, it is listing the complete command, right? So this Control R is to search the history in reverse order and get the command which you want to execute. Control R, and you just type AN, or Control R, you just type L. It will list the complete command. Okay. This is called reverse search. So these things will be useful when you are working on the Linux machine regularly, and something like you want to type faster, or you want to get the things, something like searching, getting a very big command automatically, or filling automatically, or you want to go to the beginning of the command or go to the end of the command, and you have typed something wrong and you want to remove the complete line. So in these situations, these shell properties will be useful. Is this clear? Control A to go to the beginning, Control E to go to the end, Control W is to remove a word, and Control U is to clear the line, Tab is to autofill, and reverse search is for Control R. If you just press Control R, it will give the prompt, and there you can enter some unique word from the command that will fill up the entire command for you. Okay. Most preferred utility, it depends on the distribution, right? You can use apt-get for Ubuntu, or you can use Yum for CentOS or Fedora. And it's in some cases you want to download a particular file and you want to install manually. In that case, you have to use RPM or DPKG. Preferred one is Yum or apt-get, because that will take care of the dependencies. If you install RPM using RPM-IVH or DPKG, you have to install one by one all the packages. So to automate that only, we have a repository tools. Okay. Yeah, RPM is to install a single package. Yum is to install multiple packages and take care of the dependencies. So there is no difference in deb or RPM. It's just the tools, how they package. So it's a package is nothing but a collection of some files, right? So how do we package for each distribution? So Ubuntu follows one convention, and Red Hat package is other convention, right? So RPM we use to bundle all the files into a single package, and for Ubuntu it is Debian, right? Okay, so there is one more concept called mount, right? So let us say in a data center we have 100 machines, right? 100 servers, and I want to install a particular package, let us say Ansible, on all of the machines, for example. And so I log into each server, right? And then I log into each server, then I install Ansible using either RPM-QA, RPM-IVH, ansible.rpm, or I just say yum install Ansible. This will install the Ansible package on all the machines. So like this, I need to install the package, right? Like this, I need to install let us say I'm using RPM for now. So what are the things I need to do? First, I need to download the package. Download manually from the net, and then it will install Ansible.rpm. So when you download, you get this package locally available, right? Ansible.rpm will be available on the machine. Then when we execute RPM-IVH, it will install Ansible, right? So like this, I need to do on 100 machines. It can be anything, whether any application or any tool or anything. If you want to install, let us say we are downloading and then we are installing, right? So this is a time-consuming process, right? So what I'll do is, so this is one scenario, and the second scenario is, let us say I want to store log files, right? From 100 machines, on 100 machines there is a log directory called var, and application is writing to this directory. Let us say the application name is XYZ. So on each machine there is a log file called xyz.log, and on 100 machines that application is running and it is writing to this xyz.log. Let us say on the local machine the space is not available. So I want to store all these logs from all 100 machines into a centralized server, right? I want to write log files from all these machines into a centralized server, right? So how to do that? So the enhancement is we can configure something called a NFS server and mount this NFS server to all remaining 100 machines. Let us say I have one NFS server, right? And I have 100 machines. So there are some prerequisites to be done to convert one machine as a NFS server. What is NFS? NFS is network file sharing. Okay, this is a protocol using which we can share a particular file system from over the network to all these 100 machines. Let us say you have a laptop of 100 GB and you want another 100 GB space to store something, right? And this is like not only from your laptop, there are 10 people who has 10 laptops and even they want to store their files on a centralized machine. So something like this, let us say there are 10 people working in an organization, they have 10 Windows laptops and they want to store movies and music on a centralized laptop so that one person downloads a movie and puts on this centralized laptop and centralized server so that anybody else can also download that or copy that movie from this centralized location, right? So let us say there are 10 laptops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, and each has a different capacities. One has 1 TB, the other has 100 GB, the other has something like 500 GB, etc. Right? So person 1 downloaded a movie and he has to transfer it to all the other people. How to do that? So he can use a USB or external drive, right? In the same way, person 4 has downloaded another movie and he wants to share it with others, right? So instead of that, what we can do is we can configure one of the machine 11th as the NFS server, right? And then keep all his movies. So everybody can access this. Everybody copies all their movies and downloads to this particular server. So let us say this has very huge capacity, 100 TB hard disk is there, right? Now this is configured as an NFS server. So there is some procedure to configure as an NFS server. We have to install some utilities. We have to get that process running. So once this is done, what we'll do is we'll attach this 11th server to all the machines. We map the drive. So here locally 1 TB is available, but there is a NFS server which is also attached to this machine, right? What is the size of this machine? 100 TB hard disk. Now this person 1 has 1 TB locally, 100 TB remotely attached, right? This is not local space. This is the space from the network. So this is something like we have attached, we have mounted a external drive to this person's laptop. He can store his movies or music on this NFS server, right? So the total amount of memory, the total amount of space available for this person is 101 TB, but 1 TB is only available locally, 100 TB is available remotely, right? So he can copy all his movies or whatever he wants to share onto the NFS server, and he can give this path so that anybody else can also download the movies from this centralized server. So here we have attached a external drive over the network, or attached we call it mounted. So we have mounted NFS server over the internet, right? That is called NFS, network file sharing. Basically we are sharing the file system with a few people, right? So here there are 10 people, everybody can mount this NFS server to their local machine and they can access the shared file system. Is this clear? This is called mounting and unmounting. Mounting is nothing but attaching and detaching. So mount is the command, umount is the other command to detach. So mount is to attach, umount is to detach. Okay, So this example I have said for Windows, but ideally there is this another procedure to do that for Linux. So if it is a Windows laptop, so there is something called a map drive concept. What is that? Let us say you have C drive, you have D drive locally, and this machine we can attach it as another drive. Let us say Z. So this two is like the space available is 1 TB, and this Z is actually from a remote machine from the 11th server, and it has 100 TB. So from C drive we can copy it to Z drive, and we can also from Z drive we can copy to C drive. So basically we are sharing and we are downloading the files, we are uploading the files to the centralized server. This is called NFS server. Is this clear? So basically we mount a remote file system to the local machine using mount command, and we detach it using umount command. So we can also download the files from the centralized location. So this is like everybody can share their files on that server, and anybody can download or upload their files, right? So in this scenario, there are 100 servers, and one server is configured as NFS server. So to all 100 servers, attach or mount NFS server. So this server will be available to all machines, and anybody can download or upload the files to that. So what is the command? Mount NFS server IP or the host name / the directory which you want to mount. Let us say /b, then /a. So here /a is actually your local directory. /b is a directory from the NFS server. So all the files from /b will be available in your /a, right? You can copy the files to /a, so they will be available to everybody under /b. Is this clear? So we'll stop here. We'll see how to do that, how to configure the mount point, how to configure, how to share the files. Okay. Any questions? /a is your local directory. /b is your NFS directory. /b is attached to /a, means all the files in /b will also be available in /a. We'll see that. Okay. We'll take one NFS server. We'll configure one machine as an NFS server. We'll configure one as the client. Then we attach that file system and then see how to handle read-only, read-write. If packages are not available in yum repository, you have to do something called install epl.repo, which is extra packages for enterprise Linux. So this is a centralized repository which is created by Red Hat. This can be used for all others like Fedora, CentOS, and Red Hat. You install this package, and then most of the packages will be available here, and you can just say yum install on the package. Okay, we'll see that in the coming classes.